I'll back up. Senator Grew,
Here.
Senator Hicks, Senator Kensky, Senator Rothfuss,
Here.
Representative Connolly, Representative Gray, Representative Greer,
Excused.
Representative Schwartz,
Here.
Representative Summers,
Here.
Representative Yen,
Here.
Vice Chairman Barlow,
Here.
and Chairman Dockstetter.
Here,
You have a quorum.
thank you. And again, bringing the Management Council to order, February 8th, 2022, 9 o'clock in the morning. First up for our consideration, Advisor's Bill, David Hopkinson. Oh, I skipped right past those. Double check. Do I have an approval? Do I have a motion to approve minutes?
Motion to approve the
Is there a
minutes.
second?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, so I would like to amend the minutes to allow for a executive session at the closing of business
It's not minutes.
or agenda. Sorry. Oh, minutes. My apologies. I didn't even hear my apologies.
Okay, that's okay. So we'll hold that. That's on the agenda. Moving and seconded on the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Rushing things aren't along. Revisers Bill, David Hopkinson. Did you? So are you still there with us?
Mr. Chairman, so maybe this is a question for Mr. Obrecht. Consider any final business before the management. Is that open enough to allow us to have a management or a executive session that is for personnel matters?
Mr. Chairman, I think so, but I think it's good to announce right now too, that that's the plan of council.
Absent objection, we'll do that then. That'll be the conclusion of this meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
All
My
right.
apologies.
Mr. Hopkinson, now you're really ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David Hopkinson with the Legislative Service Office, walking through 22 LSO 017, the reviser's bill. And I'll just walk through what the changes actually are in the bill. First on page 2, first change we see line 12. That's just a grammatical correction from years to years, changing that apostrophe. On lines 22, a correction there, correcting chapter 3 of this article to make it article 3 of this chapter. The articles don't have chapters. That was just a error there. On page 3, lines 15 through 17, the change here is simply correcting the numerical order that the statutes are presented in to make them more consistent. There's no change to the statutes themselves. Simply the order.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, sorry. I couldn't hear that. I apologize.
That change on lines 15 through 17 is simply changing the numerical order. It's not changing any of the substance. So it's just a correction to make it more in line with how we typically draft or put the statutes in order.
Thank you. See?
On page 4, line 1, changing insure to insure, a correction there to what it makes frankly more sense within the context of that section. The change on line 11 is removing an extraneous and. When that statute was amended, they didn't correct where that and was. And so it just needs to be removed. On line 17, this is just a correction to the spelling of fresco. On page 5, line 4, striking 4. In that sentence, you can see there was multiple 4s, and that's just again a correction there to make that grammatically correct, that sentence. On line 23, this is a correction to an incorrect statutory reference. When 2 House bills were passed at the same time, they both created paragraph 24. And when that change was made internally, this was an oversight, and that statute number citation needed to be corrected to 25. On page 6, and we're striking the language educational suitability and technological readiness. The same change is on the top of page 7, lines 2 and 3. This change is offered to correct an oversight from 2021. Senate File 2 made extensive amendments to the school facilities statutes and included the deletion of any measure of educational suitability and technological readiness in Wyoming Statute 2115-117A, which is referenced here in this statute. And this was, these references were missed being removed in that legislation, and so that's a correction here. The Select Committee considered a bill draft earlier this interim, the Select Committee on School Facilities, to strike that language, but elected instead to have that put into the reviser's bill. And so certainly it's up to this council to determine if that is suitable for the reviser's bill, this particular change. On lines, page 7, line 11, this is to correct a reference from insured to insurer. Again, in the context of this section, that is what should have been referenced there. On lines 21 and 22, this is to extend the definition of this act to include Article 17. This section deals with requiring the Department of Transportation to promulgate rules for the safe and efficient removal of vehicles from highways. And the context makes it clear that not including this act was an oversight when this legislation was enacted. We're not including that within the definition of this act. On page 8, line 12, it just removes a reference to a statute subsection A that was repealed in 1998. On page 9, changing on line 2 and also on line 10, changing government to governance. It's just a grammatical correction in each of those sections. At the bottom of page 9, line 22, again, this is another amendment just extending a definition of this act to include a new chapter that should have included that when it was created. On page 11, this is removing the striking as provided in Wyoming Statute 213310. That's just removing a reference to a statute that has been repealed. That 213310 is repealed. Section 3 repeals 2116-1307C, and this is just referencing, as it indicates in the staff comment, it concerns Hathaway success curriculum requirements for pre-2010, and at this point is obsolete. And then on page 12, section 4 makes the act effective July 1st, 2022. There is, along with this, proposed amendment for the committee, and it's in the materials 2-02, which would insert Wyoming Statute 2113-713 and strike language that says subject to Wyoming Statute 2115-105. And that's, again, just getting rid of an obsolete reference. 2115-105 was repealed in 2014. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Thank you. Committee questions? Questions? That's simple, sir. So. Double checking. Go ahead.
Thank you.
We have somebody on.
Mr. Chairman, I'd move to the management council to sponsor the revisers bill.
Second. Moved and seconded.
We should have a motion on the bill first, Mr. President.
Move the bill.
What it was doing.
Oh,
I heard a motion to amend without a motion to bill. My apologies, sir.
Just for quick clarification.
I move to sponsor the bill, the revisers bill as a management council bill.
All right, thank you. Moved and seconded. Any further questions?
Chairman, I'd move to amend the bill with the suggested language on the 2113-713 tax levy.
Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Passed. Next up for consideration. Oh, yeah. That's good. Go ahead. Any further discussion? We have that. Let's take a roll. We get back into the swing of things. Go ahead, take the roll.
Senator Driscoll.
Excused.
Excused. Senator Guru,
Aye.
Senator Hicks,
Excused?
Senator Kinsky,
Aye.
He's here. Okay.
Senator Rothfuss,
Aye.
Representative Connolly. Aye. Representative Gray. Representative Greer. Representative Schwartz,
Aye.
Representative Summers,
Aye.
Representative Yen,
Aye.
Vice Chairman Barlow,
Aye.
Chairman Dockstader.
Aye. All right, revised bills passed. Thank you, Mr. Hopkinson. Josh Anderson. Administrative Rules Report.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Josh
Hi.
Anderson, LSO.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Should have in your materials the report of the governor's response to Management Council actions on administrative rules for 2021. First off, just want to say a thank you to your staff. The legal staff, I think, does a great job in looking at these rules. We got a fairly large number of them this year. We had, I think, 95 formal rules and then another 43 emergency rules. This report, it just notes in the case where the recommendation from staff was for the governor to take some action, then the governor's response to that action. So on page 2, first off, there were no rules that were objected to due to procedural issues. And section B there were a couple of rules that were objected to for substantive issues. The whole rule was not objected to, but there were the recommendation was for the governor to strike a portion of those rules. So you'll see there. The first one was a rule from the Wyoming Gaming Commission. There were 2 issues that were noted. One was that the rule implied that there could be standards that were specified or established outside of rules that would apply. And it just noted that that may not comply with the requirements of statute. The rules also did provide for a temporary permit, which did not appear to be authorized in statute. The recommendation was for the governor to direct the commission to amend or rescind the rules as necessary. In the governor's response, which was included in the packet, he did strike 2 sections of the rules dealing with those temporary permits as recommended in the rule review. The second rule, Mr. Chairman, was from the Department of Education related to the Hathaway Scholarship Program. Those rules deleted the requirements for 2 years of either fine and performing arts, career and technical education, or 2 additional years of foreign language. I believe that was an unintended change that was included in the rules. The recommendation was for the governor to use his authority to disapprove that portion of the rule. And in the governor's response, the governor did remove or unstrike that stricken language so that it is currently still retained in the rules. Finally, Mr. Chairman, there's one just recently from the Department of Workforce Services. This is related to the requirement to incorporate material by reference. The statute requires a statement that the rule does not include later amendments or additions. The rules stated that they would use the most recent addition which of course would change over time. And we noted in the rule review that that might exceed that statutory authority related to incorporation by reference. At this time, we have not received a response to that rule yet. There were, Mr. Chairman, some other issues that we raised in rule reviews, either procedural or technical issues, but we did not recommend non-consent. The most common one is failure by the agency to provide notice that rules are new rules. When rules are new rules, then our office provides notice that rulemaking is happening to either the prime sponsor or the committee responsible for that bill. New rules is kind of a misnomer in that it's really the first rule in response to legislative action. And so it could be just a minor amendment to an existing rule, but it would be technically called a new rule. I think that's why the agencies are often confused. But so we did note that in a number of rule reviews this year. And then on the final page, Mr. Chairman, then there were some other rules we noted technical issues with. Those vary from incorrect references, typographical, grammatical, or formatting errors, potential issues with the statement of reasons, or issues with the incorporation by reference, as we noted in that one above. We didn't have any rules this year that were removed from the consent list. And we didn't have any rules that were objected to by the governor that we hadn't noted. That take any questions, Mr.
So,
Chairman?
Anderson, in the case where there's no response and it's just left as is, just is what it is.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman. Yeah.
Thank you. Further
Mr.
questions?
Chairman?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And thank you for all the hard work on this. And I guess that is my question. So
Thank you.
all right, thank you. My question is, and I'm sure in the workload study you guys did a few years ago, how much time do we put into reviewing rules? And then what are we seeing? Is that increasing over time? Is it kind of just up and down? What are our trends? How much time do we spend? What are our trends?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know if I have a good number on the amount of total time the office spends. I do think, we take a good hard look at these rules. The workload does go up and down. I think this year we had 43 emergency rules and 2020 with all the COVID stuff. I think we had over 100 emergency rules. So it just kind of goes up and down. And the rules can vary just like, bills. So sometimes they're one pagers and sometimes they're, hundreds of pages. But it is part of the function of the office to make sure, we're looking to make sure that the rules are done in conformance with procedure, in conformance with the statute and with the Constitution.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add on to what Josh said. I think for the average staff attorney, a rule review takes between 10 and 20% of their total time during the year. The agency rule reviews. I mean, it's a significant portion of what we do, and it's important. I mean, it's actually has the force and effect of law. And it's very much a partnership between LSO, the agency, and the Attorney General's office, and ultimately the governor's office, in making sure we get those as right as we possibly can. I would also say it's likely the least favorite thing that the attorneys have to do every year. They have to opine on someone else's work on a subject matter they know nothing about. And it's just, it's not very much fun, and it's not, there's almost zero reward, and all you get is blame if you derail the rulemaking process.
Thank you, Matt. Any further questions? Okay, Matt, do we have to move to accept these or process?
Mr. Chairman, no, the statute just says that you're to receive them.
Okay, so
And-
received then.
Yep. And if there was any changes you wanted to make, or if you wanted to bring a legislative order or consider any rule action that the governor had made. That's the purpose of this report.
Okay. Committee, anything else regarding these? Apparently not. Mr. Anderson, thank you. That, Senator Ellis, welcome to Management Council.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of Management Council. I want to thank you for taking the time to look at our dress code policy that we have in the legislature. And I also want to thank LSO. I had some concerns about how the language was worded. And so I'm sure you're very familiar with Tamara from LSO. She has done some research on what dress codes look like in other states. And I'm sure can address questions about why our current dress code policy maybe needs another look. In general, I'm certainly not an expert in employment law. However, I'm very aware that the trend in business environments is to try and keep dress codes as gender neutral as possible. It is acceptable to have different requirements for men and women. That's acceptable in the workplace. But I think the question is whether or not women face an undue burden or men face an undue burden with certain dress code requirements. And so when you see litigation, that's what some of those questions tend to turn on. So when I read our dress code policy, I think that the part that raises the most concern for me is, business formal for women is defined as a suit or dress slacks, skirt, dress blouse, you can see the list there. But then it's, specifically calls women to be mindful of their necklines and skirt lengths. And so, looking at what's out there, we can look at the NCSL memo and just how other states are tackling this issue. But I think we can kind of address some of the concerns. You'll see that for women, we're not allowed to wear flip-flops, tennis shoes, open-toe sandals, et cetera. That's certainly, I think, a requirement that men could abide by as well. I think we can make some adjustments, making it clear that denim material fleece, that's, covered for everyone. And then just giving Management Council and our leadership the ability to visit with individual members if they don't feel like they're adhering to the dress code. So that's why you'll see the changes looking at, starting with the new revised paragraph 2, instead of having business formal for men versus business formal for women, we just include in there that it's defined as a suit or dress slacks. You might want to insert the word or dress skirt, jacket, tie, dress shirt or blouse, and dress shoes or dress boots, clarifying that boots must be polished. Paragraph A allows for the wearing of bolo ties. Again, they have to be worn tight with the top button of a collared shirt to be buttoned. But then here's where you'll see the insertion of the flip-flop tennis shoes and open-toe sandals that would apply to both men and women serving in the legislature. So it's a pretty straightforward request. Certainly there are different ways that you could address this issue. If you looked at the NCSL memo, you could say less is more in some regards, just saying that members are required to maintain professional dress. There are lots of different examples if you wanted it to be shorter. But you all are in Management Council. You all are the ones that have conversations with other members and need to enforce these provisions. I think in other states, there's, been concern about whether or not men wear their ties tied up tight to their neck. So, I'll leave it to you in your discretion to see if this kind of gets at your authority to require those members to tighten up their tie if you think that's appropriate. So with that, I'd ask if absent any questions, maybe it would be a good segue for Tamara to talk about her research.
Tamara.
Well, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I did contact NCSL and they did provide me excerpts, and compared to other states, Wyoming is one of the most prescriptive in defining what constitutes business dress. And we did adopt these changes in 2011. It was adopted by Management Council and then amended once related to the name badge, as you probably all will remember, in 2017. So that's a little bit of the history. Now, as far as the law regarding dress codes go, things are changing slightly, and there is a movement in a lot of companies to move towards more gender neutral terms or more modern terminology and not referencing the display of women's body parts or shoulders or knees or anything like that, as our dress code does. And I think that that is not a lot of case law that's come out yet saying that dress codes can raise claims of discrimination or cause other issues in the employment situation, not in the legislative situation. But keep in mind that this dress code applies to employees as well as members when they're on the floor. And so generally what I found is that attorneys and attorney groups and employment law practices are recommending more modern language that is closer to gender neutral, or at least equally burdensome, not a lot more detail for women or for men. And then, of course, anything that comes close to requiring birth sex can raise issues after recent Supreme Court cases. So I think that's a summary. If there's anything I'm missing, feel free to let me know.
Thank you. Follow up, Senator Ellis.
No, Mr. President, but I would add that, if we want to make sure that we're covering it, there are some individuals who want to include the word dress skirt on paragraph 2. So it would read business formal is defined as a suit or dress slacks or dress skirt, jacket, tie, dress shirt, or blouse. That might be a good insertion just to clarify that sometimes we don't necessarily wear suit jackets that match our skirts, but they're coordinated. So just covering those instances for dress skirts.
And what line are you on there?
And hard to describe, but that line 2, business formal is defined as a suit. And then we have dress slacks, maybe put or skirt.
Thank you.
And then jacket, tie, dress shirt, or dress blouse.
Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. I totally support this, but the construct of the sentence becomes awkward because it still requires everyone to wear a tie. And there's some other interesting issues, the way that it's constructed. You could wear a bolo tie, obviously. We provide that obvious and important exception. But a tie, nonetheless. So I look at Representative Summers. I don't know what the solution is. I'm totally for it, but there's some challenges there with the construct.
Mr. President.
Go ahead.
No, I shared the same concern in visiting with LSO. I said, well, I'm a woman. I'm not going to wear a tie or a bolo tie. Maybe we need to clarify that ties and bolo ties are required for men, but then we're back into having for men ties and bolo ties are acceptable forms of neckwear. So you can tackle it that way, up to you. But I share your concern. I can tell you I will not be wearing a tie or bolo tie.
Mr. President, one
Go
other
ahead.
thought. I'm now a little bit offended to find out too late that flip-flops were okay
Too late.
up until this,
Too
and
late.
now I'm losing that opportunity. So
You missed your
Tragic.
opportunity. Senator Ellis, would you be fine to leave it as is and just let it proceed rather than try to put a separate sentence, fines for men?
Yeah, Mr. President, I think that, where this all comes together for me is that, under the revised now paragraph 4, it says leadership of the House and Senate are responsible for ensuring members are dressed in business formal attire and will notify members. And so it's a leap of faith on my part that leadership will look at this and make those modifications necessary so that women, for example, aren't required to wear ties or bolo ties.
Understood. Any further follow-up? Go ahead. We Representative and then to Representative Summers. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too support making a change here. And in fact, to be honest, there have been at least 2 instances that I've known of in the past couple of years where women who were completely inappropriately dressed were being criticized for the clothes that they had on or what they were showing or not showing. And so I do appreciate doing this. I would like to include dress and skirt in here in line 2. And I think we can take care of it by doing an and or. It's not the most elegant, but that does take
And/or
care
maybe,
of
yeah.
the issue. And then I'd honestly get rid of the prohibition on the flip-flops, tennis shoes, and open-toed sandals. And I'm going to joke that I brought with me women's appropriate footwear for the summer is different often than men. And that, given my knee last year, I got myself a lower heeled sandal, which everyone seemed to think was totally fine this summer at meetings. So the open-toed sandal does not make a whole lot of sense to me. But also, when we have on line 2 that we are to wear dress shoes or dress boots, I don't think there's any need for a sentence on a prohibition. So I will ultimately make amendments to add a dress and a dress skirt and to get rid of the flip-flop
Fair enough.
line.
Do you want to, Representative Connolly, you want to do that as an amendment later or
Yes.
now?
Yes,
Later. Okay.
Right now.
Right now.
if we move it, then sure, I want to do it right now.
Mr.
Follow
President.
up?
Yes, thanks, Mr. President. Just as a note, you'll see that the first sentence of this policy says members of the legislature are required to dress in business formal attire during the session. So I've interpreted that to be pretty strict to what happens in the chamber, because like Representative Connolly, I wear dress sandals in the summer during interim meetings.
Again. Go ahead.
On that point, though, if we have a special session, that seems like a very, and we do, we seem to have those. That seems like a perfectly appropriate footwear to qualify during our summer special session, so. Yeah, yeah, and I think I'd look nice.
Go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And first, I guess my question to you, Senator Ellis, is one sufficient? Do we have to get into the gory details of dress or skirt or blouse, or do we just say business formal dress is expected? I mean, that's just a question of what your preference would be.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. President. Representative Summers, great question. So that's, I think, why we provided you with the NCSL options. If you wanted to say less is more, you're supposed to be in business attire, professional business attire, you could go that route. My goal in tinkering with this language was trying to preserve as much of the language that Management Council adopted in prior years. It's your preference. I don't have a preference. I just dislike the way it's worded now.
Thank you.
Thank
Senator.
you. One more question, Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I think this question would be to Matt or somebody that's been in here a while. I think we've always tried to have a business formal in committee meetings in the interim, but it's not required. And a few years ago, I'm not going to say what committee I was in, but I thought some members came in attire that was completely inappropriate for what we are. And so how's that been handled?
Go ahead, Matt, you're gonna address that?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. The chairman of the committee has the duty to ensure that members of the committee are dressed appropriately for the committee meeting. There is, just like committee proceedings are less formal than session proceedings. I think we've all been to committee meetings where the chairman says, hey, it's hot in here. Please feel free to remove your jacket or loosen the top button of your shirt. So it's really within the chairman's prerogative to ensure that appropriate dress code is followed, even though I would say it is less formal than floor proceedings.
Get a little casual in the committee. Let's go to Senator Grew up on the screen first, then back to you. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question about the last line in number 2, dress shoes and dress boots. It's funny, I guess, tradition versus rule. I thought the rule was that, or so it must have just been a tradition, that we had to wear shoes that could be shined, that no matter what. But I've also known the last couple of years, some of the members, when have had like a foot ailment or sometimes neuropathy, other things, just gets to a point where wearing a dress shoe doesn't work. But, I wonder if we make allowances for that here or just let that go at the discretion of the chairs as far as when someone has a medical condition or what. I just wanted to throw that out there because I know it has come up a couple of times.
Anybody on the committee? And also, Senator, do you have any follow-up?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I've noticed that too. And, certainly we have members who are advanced in years and wear special shoes and they don't really fit under this dress code policy. Again, I think if you wanted to write every single rule or possible scenario out there of what's acceptable, this would be a very, very long policy. So at some level, I think we just need to afford our leadership some discretion to make those calls.
Thank you. Members of the committee? Yeah, we're representing you. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, looking at this NCSL survey, they are all rules, either House rules, joint rules, Senate rules, except for ours. And so I guess my question, maybe if this is for Matt or Tamara, if you know, why is this a management council policy and not a rule? Especially because we only have one woman on management council who's deciding the rules for how all the women in the legislature need to dress. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I think I can answer that. Is just the issue was brought to council. And I don't think you ever rose to the level of being important enough to take to the floors. It was just handled in council.
Yeah.
Certainly nothing prohibiting it from being decided.
Here, let's do this, folks. Oh, go ahead. Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that this has been contentious in other states because they have rules that say if you're not in proper dress attire, that you are excluded from participating in certain floor activities, including voting. So in states where maybe a vote might be close on a certain issue, maybe this issue has come up and has been a little bit more hotly debated. So I don't know. Fortunately, I'm unaware of that in Wyoming, but if you Google dress code policy stuff and see what's happened out there, I think that's occurred in other states.
Okay. I can only recall one instance. About 15 years, we had to work through a set of blue jeans. And there was some question whether if they were pressed, did it change? Nice. So folks, we do have some proposals here for changes. Would you like to continue with that, Representative Conley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would. Under number 2, let's change the language so it reads business formal can include a suit, comma, dress, comma, dress slacks, jacket, tie, skirt, dress shirt or blouse, and dress shoes or dress boots.
Everyone clear on that? Is there a second? Go ahead. Well, should we second and then go into the discussion?
Yeah, I'll second.
Okay, now go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I just want us to contemplate for a moment, and really I would have tried to do this before a motion was made, but do we want to go down the prescriptive path, or do we just want to do 1, for example, and 4, which is the jeans denim thing, and be done with it? I mean, then we don't, I think that's, anyway, that's my opinion. I think business formal, if somebody in the body asks a member of leadership what business formal is, we can drag out a definition, but I just wonder why we're getting this detail.
Representative Yin and then back to the sponsor.
Mr. Chairman, I actually like the New Mexico Senate and House rule. So it's on page 3 of the NCSL survey, where it's members of the House shall dress in business attire befitting the decorum of the House, and the wearing of bolo ties shall be permitted. So it's a white list of what you're allowed. And then all persons permitted access to the floor shall be held to the same standard. And then maybe we could add leadership of the House and Senate's responsible for ensuring members are dressed. So we don't go down the prescriptive route except for allowing specific things. And then we just leave most of the discretion to leadership.
Representative Yin, you want to come back and change that if we double check first with Representative Conley?
Yeah,
where she is?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to withdraw my motion.
Okay. Absent objection, that's been withdrawn. Okay. Go back to you, Representative. Oh,
Mr. Chairman, just a little more discussion before we make another motion. And then I'm fine going down that path, but I think we have to make the determination here on jeans versus not jeans. Business attire in a ranching community is dirty jeans and dirty boots. And I think we need to make that call one way or the other. You know, if we're going to allow nice jeans, that's fine. If we're not, we need to say that, but we need to be explicit, I think, in how we handle jeans. Otherwise, we're going to, as members of leadership, we're going to have to enforce that one way or the other and not have a way to do that.
do a lot of meetings in your country, Representative, with a sports jacket and jeans. Okay, Representative Yin, do you want to come back around and do that? All for more specific language.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion to amend the dress code in the chambers during session to change it to match the New Mexico House rule, but instead of House of Representatives, it would be members of the Wyoming legislature shall dress in business attire befitting the decorum of the legislature and the wearing of bolo ties shall be permitted. However, denim shall not be permitted. All persons permitted access to the floor of the House or Senate shall be held to the same standard. And then another section saying, matching amended Rule 4 on the amendment, which is leadership of the House and Senate are responsible for ensuring members are dressed in business formal attire and will notify members who may not meet the dress code.
Clear, I understand that. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a second. Further discussion, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think this actually replaces the entire thing.
Correct.
One thing that gets lost in that is the badges. And so we can add that later, but I just wanted to be clear, if our badge is going to be, I did not hear it in the motion, but basically the motion is strike, insert, but badges get left out of that. So
Friendly
just some
representative
comment.
Ian?
Mr. Chairman, if it is amenable to my second, I would take a friendly amendment to amend the name badges. The name badge requirement from our current policy is also within that.
So be it absent objection. All right. Representative Schwartz, you're part of the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I support the concept here. I'm just find it curious that we need to mention bolo ties, because if we look at the language befitting the decorum of the chamber, I mean, bolos have always been considered to be appropriate wear. And it seems odd that we would call them out in particular. And so actually I would make a motion, if it's a friendly amendment, to delete that. If not, I make that motion.
Mr. Chairman, it is not friendly.
Not friendly. Thank you, Representative Schwartz. We do appreciate your consideration today. On one side of this building, those bolos are specific to a given day and week. So, all right. Let's proceed. Any further discussion? We have a motion. We have a second. As amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Passed. All right.
And Mr. Chairman, I do have one clarifying question. New Mexico's policy does use the term business attire, while Wyoming uses the term business formal attire. And I think I heard the bringer of the motion use both terms. So I want to be clear if you are keeping business formal attire or changing that to business
Just for a
attire.
matter of clarification, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my intent was business formal attire. If that's okay.
Thank you.
Did I do it? All right. We don't have to do a roll call, Mr. All right. Anything further from those presented? All right, thank you. Move on. Thank you, Senator Ellis. Thank you, Tamara. Says break. I don't know that we need one. Does anybody need a break for just a moment, or we just keep moving? Let's keep moving until we're broken. Visitor Services update. Why 2021 recap? Brianna, you're in charge of that. How'd the year go?
Good morning, members of council, Mr. Chairman, Rhianna Davidson, Legislative Service Office. I am going to provide you a quick highlight of our visitor services program this morning. In your packet, you all received a recap of the year and kind of wanted to give you guys context of the program, which transitions nicely into the Capital Interpretive Exhibit and Wayfinding Subcommittee update. So for just a little background knowledge, the Legislative Service Office has been participating in visitor and student services roughly for about 18 years. Prior to the Capitol restoration and renovation, the Legislative Service Office worked collaboratively with an interagency working group comprised of the State Museum, the Supreme Court, the Construction Management Division, and the Department of Education to promote cross-learning opportunities for students across the state of Wyoming. And LSO really kind of honed in on the civic engagement experience for students. And so at that time, we led student tours, primarily focusing on civic education. And then we moved out of the building. And after the grand opening in 2019, the Visitor Services Program has been expanded. And to date, we've welcomed, as noted, over 47,000 visitors to the state capitol. Some kind of highlights that I wanted to bring to your attention today is we've recruited and retained 30 volunteer visitor docents. They are staffed downstairs out of that south West office. They welcome visitors to the Capitol. They help answer questions, they greet, and they share their enthusiasm for the state of Wyoming. And in addition to launching the volunteer docents, we've also started leading all guided tours for the Capitol Square, so adult tours and student tours. And the reason why a guided tour is necessary and why the work that you'll hear from Chairman Landon and Wendy and myself about the Capitol Interpretive Exhibit and Wayfinding Subcommittee group is that if you were to walk in the building or today, there really isn't any information available for visitors, right? There's no information allowing them information about the building, the history, the legislative process. And so guided tours really are needed right now because there isn't any facilitation for visitors. So that's currently one of the challenges for a visitor experience, is that there's nothing without a live body welcoming them and telling them about this beautiful space. There isn't anything to do that. So that actually really transitions nicely into the following update that we're going to share with you today is the future of visitor services, which is currently with the Capitol Interpretive and Exhibit Wayfinding Subcommittee. And Senator Landon and Wendy are going to talk a little bit more about that. But the future of that experience
You
is
want them at the
developing.
Table too? Go
Sure,
ahead.
yeah, they can
Yeah.
come on up.
Step right up here, folks.
Developing that experience. And with that, I will pause and happy to answer any specific visitor services questions that you might have. But we also have a presentation that we're going to also share with you. So do you guys have any specific questions?
Not specific. I have one in general. I just, we kind of were in a year that was different than 21 was different, and now 22 will be different. We're coming out of this COVID, so to speak. So what, do you see some more folks in this precious building?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would definitely say that people are excited to continue to experience this, and there has been an uptick in visitation.
Any questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. What hours of the day is this staff per week? Is it 8 to 5?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, the volunteer docents are here from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday.
Okay. Mr. Chairman? Can I ask a follow-up?
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Reading some numbers here.
My other question, Ms. Davison, is, during session, have you thought about a way to communicate with legislators? I mean, obviously, a lot's going on about groups that are here, even through the volunteer docents, that maybe we could talk to, introduce ourselves, answer any questions in some ways, especially in a lunch. Maybe we got 15 minutes or something. Some way of communicating that over email. I mean, I know it's an added thing, but during sessions, exciting to visit the Capitol, and was wondering if there have been thoughts about that in a way to maybe have some sort of procedure. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, so currently you are notified if a school group comes to and visits from your district. So I do put a note on your desk saying, Fort Casper Academy is here to visit. So school groups, I do send a note into the floor. And then most of the adult groups actually do notify a member from their district if they are here. But what I can do for you is all the groups that do visit, we put on our calendar, the legislative calendar, and that has all the events. So all lobbying events, all groups, all floor ceremonies. And that's kind of a one-stop shop for information. So I'd be happy to direct that or share that with you. And you can see everybody who's scheduled to come and what time of day, and if they're having a tour, if they're viewing the proceedings. I'd be happy to share that with you if you'd like.
Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Representative Connolly?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was talk in the past about increasing the availability for the public to come into the building over the 4th of July and Cheyenne Frontier Days, and outside of just 8 to 5, maybe later into the evening, weekends. Any more discussion about that?
Go ahead.
Yeah, Representative Connolly, Mr. Chairman, that's a great question, and that is something that the subcommittee is evaluating is extended hours. And we'll be making a recommendation of what does the building hours look like? What is a visitor experience? Does it mirror the hours of the State Museum? So currently, exactly what you've said, to date, we've kind of piloted a program where we've kept the building open of certain holidays. And certainly the holidays, for example, like Martin Luther King, where JAC was working. So the building security was already going to be here. So we're able to keep the building open. So that is something that we are evaluating on a greater level of what is the desired hours for the public year round, even perhaps on weekends, providing recommendation.
All right, thank you. Further questions? Thank you. It's a lot goes into this, you know, last year we needed some help and Wendy was good enough to help a couple of us put together some notes. Go around this place, I take it for granted, and then after I read her notes, I so much more that goes into this building. Appreciate that. So continue on. Where do you want to take us from here?
So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to hand the reins over to our co-chairman, Senator Landon and Wendy, and we're going to walk you through kind of a high-level overview of the subcommittee's work. And I'm going to go ahead and get a PowerPoint started.
Thank you, Chairman Landon. Thanks for making the trip in person. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. Rihanna, thank you for that introduction. Appreciate Rihanna is one of our staff members who serves on the subcommittee and does a terrific job. Mr. President, you asked me a few months ago to sit in this chair and kind of head up this effort. I've been glad to do that. I have to tell you that these two sitting with me have provided quite an education for me. It's been a great 7 or 8 months. We put a lot of time into this. So what we're going to do this morning, Mr. Chairman, I thought it might be beneficial to just kind of take a quick 30,000-foot view as to what the Wayfinding Committee, it's a subcommittee of the State Building Commission. And it's a combination of those of us in the legislature, staff and legislators, along with those representatives from the executive branch. It's going to take a collective effort if we're going to finish this place the way that it was intended a few years ago. So to start with, just a little bit of background. We want to run you through, you know, where we were, where we got to, and where we are now. Essentially, the construction, as we all know, is pretty well done here on the state capitol. What we envisioned as a capital oversight group back in 2015 and 16, and by the way, there's only a couple of us around who really served on that oversight committee, and Senator Rothfuss, I believe, was one of those. So he will remember that the vision at that time was to bring the People's House back to life. We rescued this building just about in the nick of time, I think, Mr. Chairman. That's the good news. The challenge to us now, though, is to finish what that vision was. So I wanted to tip my Stetson to the oversight group. I think they provided a blueprint, kind of a backbone as to what we need to finish up here at the Capitol. So on comes the Wayfinding Subcommittee of SBC. I served as the co-chairman these past few months with co-chairman Balo. And as you know, the superintendent is now back in a state back east. So I'm happy to say that Auditor Racinas has agreed to take over the role as the co-chairman representing the executive branch. We met again last week, and I would say that Treasurer Myers sat in on the meeting, and it was good to have him there as well. We have some terrific representatives from throughout the executive branch, and we also, of course, have Representative Nicholas and Representative Banks who serve on the subcommittee with me. So a little bit more of the background. We want to tell you a little bit later, and I'll turn it over to Wendy, Mr. Chairman, at some point here in a few minutes to get a little bit deeper into what exactly are we talking about when we talk about wayfinding and interpretive and historical kinds of things here in the Capitol. The subcommittee, really our first task was to identify someone who has the capability to push this thing up the hill. And we are delighted in the fact that we were able to contract with a company called Dimensional Innovations, and they have been amazingly helpful. We have been all over this Capitol Square over the past 8 months, this subcommittee, led in part by Dimensional Innovations, and they've done a terrific job of providing for you kind of an oversight document. I believe that you do have that. So I'm not going to read this slide by slide, but just suffice it to say that we have examined just about every door, just about every entrance, and just about every restroom throughout the complex. I would tell you this, that scope of this is much broader than I even realized when we took this on. Fellow legislators, when you park in the parking lot across the street, it starts there. Our public struggles to even know which door to come to. And so we literally talked about on the corners of this Capitol Square, that's where this wayfinding effort really needs to take place. And we also, I believe, need to begin to help people understand what kind of property they're walking onto. That's where the interpretive and the historical and the informational signs come in. We have much work to do to finish that up. I was driving down this morning thinking, you know, every one of us, I bet you're all like me. We do these projects around our house or our corral or our barn or whatever, and we get them up to speed, we get done with it, but we just really never get around to, like if we put a door in, it works, so it's good, but we never quite get around to putting the trim around the door. The other day, I was rewiring a basement project that I meant to get to 15 years ago. So, you know, I just never got it done.
It's done now.
And I finally thought, you know, I got to get this done. I hope we're not 15 years down the road talking about the Capitol that way. So that's really, we spent so much time throughout the last 8 months talking about that very thing. Where does it start? Where does it finish? And what do we need to do for the public? That's the interesting thing, members of the Management Council. We have finished the Capitol with respect to what we do here. It's interesting that the work that needs to be done is really all about the public at this point. It's all about those who come here to come before the legislature or to meet with the executive branch or to simply visit. And so we're excited to show you kind of a little bit more detail, Mr. Chairman. And Wendy's going to do that for us, but I would pause there. I'm kind of staying at a pretty high level and moving pretty quickly. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have before we move on through the slides.
Questions for Chairman Lyon? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've got just one general question, and I guess a comment, or it's probably more of a comment. But it's a question back to why haven't we done it? So we do have pictures of those that came before us on the walls, but they're not to the extent that they were before. And I thought those were so important to having a presence of those that came before, and now they're stuck down hallways where people can't see them. And I just hope that changes and we get them back on the walls where particularly our members, when you walk upstairs or whatever, that you think about who you are and where you're at.
So Representative, I'm smiling and looking at the other subcommittee members sitting here with me because boy, was that a big topic of conversation, and the subcommittee feels absolutely the same way. It's interesting. I'm going to dive off on the county road here for just a minute. We'll get back on the highway. But Mr. Chairman, when I was sworn in to join you in the state Senate, one of the first things I did after the swearing in ceremony was to go down to the House of Representatives chamber. And I found 1942 because my grandfather served in the House of Representatives and I had my picture taken with him. And you might have trouble finding him at this point. In fact, I think Representative, you're right. I'm not sure that when the public walks in this building, I'm not sure they can find Uncle Joe, who used to serve in the Senate. And so we are going to recommend, as this process continues through, that we move those montages back out so that the public can visit neighbors and friends and relatives who have served in the state capitol.
Thank you. Either of you two?
And Mr. Chairman, Representative Summers, as a follow-up to that, and this might be a good lead-in to talk about exhibits themselves. You might recall the old composites actually had a great deal of decade by decade narrative with them that described what were the major legislative accomplishments of that time, as well as a booklet that explained, where you could go find certain members. We had a lookup that we still have on our website, but it's no longer connected to where those are located. So part of what the Exhibit and Wayfinding Subcommittee talked about is both a mobile hotspots as you go to composites, and there's different ways to do it. You can do it through something called augmented reality is an exhibit type, or you can hold up your own device and see something, maybe you see, wow, the first Game and Fish commissioner, when was that appointed? And you can go further, find deeper and further information on your phone, as well as discussions about kiosks where you can look up the members and it'll tell you where in the Capitol Square those particular composites are located. So that's just one little vignette of a type of exhibit that can be done. It can have a electronic component to give you more information for types of visitors called gorgers. There's people who will spend hours here and want to see as much as they can. There's others who are just passing through and want to quickly find the information. So the exhibit plan is set up to accommodate both types of learners and different amounts of time that they have available.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just to add a punctuation mark on the conversation with regard to those who have served both in the executive branch and in the legislature. When it really comes down to it, Representative Summers, this is a state that's really all about people, maybe as much as any state I'm aware of. So many connections and so many reasons why it's important to pay attention to all the people who have served in the Capitol. So that's a big piece of what we hope to get accomplished as we move on through this.
Thank you. Other questions? Senator Rothfuss, where you served with Senator Land in the early days of transitioning on all this, do you want to comment on anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think this is an important part of continuing the vision that we had and making sure that this was open to the public and it was welcoming, and we invested so much time and energy and resources into making this wonderful experience. And it's important that we follow through on what Chairman Lannon is discussing and ensure that it is welcoming and that people understand how to actually engage with it. So appreciate the hard work and the ongoing work that all of you have continued.
So, Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you, I would like to turn it over to Wendy, and she'll be backed up by Rihanna. Anything that Rihanna has is, I'm encouraging her to jump in as well. But along the way, we will talk about the meeting rooms. I can't help but bring that up because that's a little bit of a pet of mine, and I really feel like it's one of the more exciting things that the subcommittee talked about throughout the last 6 or 8 months. We have some ideas of what we can do with those meeting rooms, which include maybe identifying regions of the state, and each of those meeting rooms could represent a region of Wyoming, for example. But we need some visuals, and we'd kind of like to have that Wyoming seal behind the dais in each of those meeting rooms and some things like that. So Wendy's going to get into that a little bit, and I think it'll be valuable to hear what are we talking about when we talk signage and wayfinding, and what's an interpretive and?
All yours, Wendy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Landon, that was a really great overview. I would add a couple other pieces about this, which is, we opened the building of July of 2019 to great fanfare, and it was incredible. And there was so much awe to see this building and the construction. But now I compare it to an empty vessel. And really, if you know your way around, if you're a member, you know your way to committee meeting rooms. If you're a lobbyist, you're starting to get to know it. But even as much as I worked on this project all the years, I still go down the wrong hall in the extension. I can't tell you how many times I'm on my way somewhere and I end up in the wrong place. It's just that what is now defined as the Capitol Square from 26th Street to 24th and Cary and Central is really a much different place than what we knew before. And the project itself was only code required signage. And so we're going to talk about what wayfinding is and what it does for visitors. And then really the whole goal of talking about this being the people's house, Dimensional Innovations often says this. They say, in your own house, you know where the bathroom is. And our visitors don't know that. Our visitors don't know when they pull up and park somewhere, they hardly know where it is okay to park. If you are, mobility challenged, you want the quickest path to get here, the doors that will get you in with ramps. We don't have any of that as part of this project. And so to truly welcome visitors is really what this experience is meant to provide, both from wayfinding as well as exhibits. As Rihanna mentioned, right now, you come into the building and a docent can kind of give you a few tips, but you really don't know. If you come into this room right now, you don't know the important story of this room. You don't know anything about how many members serve, what your histories are. And so that's really part of what this is. So going into exhibits, as I mentioned, using the context of the legislative composites, go ahead on to the next one. We show some different types of examples here. Some of them are what you traditionally think of in a museum. There are locations in the project where those fit. Some of them would be flat panels that could be moved during session to make sure we have plenty of egress for you all to go back and forth between the chambers. As I mentioned, some of it is actually using this little device, either with QR codes or other types of solutions. For wayfinding, it's not just the signage, it's not just the room number. It's getting you from point A to point B to point C. And it includes both static signs. So there may be, for example, this picture you see in the lower left is the Colorado Capitol that actually helps guide you at a macro level to your rooms. But then along the way, it'll give you little breadcrumbs to make sure you're still in the right place as a comprehensive wayfinding system. Also out here outside of the Senate lobby, you'll see a pilot project that you funded for the last biennium to start the process before we knew the Exhibit and Wayfinding Committee project would go forward of electronic wayfinding. And so those two pieces go hand in hand. Electronic wayfinding can help you visually see your way to a room. And then the physical signage helps reinforce that as you're moving from space to space. So last week, the team had a 2-day meeting and started talking about key messages. It's important to realize that this Capitol Square is not meant to be everything to everybody about Wyoming. It's meant to really focus on what is this building about. So how do you help, especially students, but also adult visitors learn about their government and how they can participate in their government? That's a key piece, the difference between the different branches. We have the Judicial Learning Center over in the Supreme Court, but we don't have anywhere that we really give a comprehensive overview of the legislative branch and the executive branches. It's also meant to provide, go ahead and we can go on to the next one. It's also meant to really take this building as a launching point for Wyoming. All of you represent different points of Wyoming. We have representatives from the Office of Tourism who staff the subcommittee, and Senator Landon's point about using different rooms to represent other points of Wyoming. We not only want, the subcommittee made a very big emphasis on, this is not a building about Cheyenne. This is a building about Wyoming. And how do you tell the stories and when people come so that they feel at home? They feel this is their home too. as well as the traveling public, how do they know what other places in the state are available to visit? So those are really some of the main themes of the space. And the final theme of the space is, what is this architecture and what is the history of the building? What is Wyoming's, what were some of Wyoming's incredible firsts that relate to this building? So just a very quick high level, we talked about the different types of technologies. So it is everything from static to augmented reality are the options on this project. Let's go ahead and go through to the, let's go to the map. So we want to just give you, we're going to go very quickly through this. We're not going to go place by place. Senator, if there's anything in particular you want to stop at, please do. The senator said this project really starts, this is not just a one-room project. It really starts from the time you come on to the Capitol Square and to know where you should go next. Down in the public meeting rooms, a lot of times people will come up the front stairs only to find out they have to go all the way back downstairs. That gets frustrating for visitors a lot of times. So really to have a very concerted understanding and effort when you first approach this building, what your purpose for visiting is and how you get there efficiently. Then we have different types of visitors to the Capitol. The ones that Rihanna has mentioned, the 47,000 visitors encompass a variety of visitor types, but a lot of those are people passing through the state of Wyoming. And a lot of them are Capitol aficionados. They come because they want to learn about capitals. And so this garden level space, the subcommittee envisions this to be the place where you can learn about the architecture and the restoration is where that would focus. And then on the east wing to start focusing on the executive branch and the governors over time. First floor is, since our statewide elected officials' main offices are over in the Hirschler building, some of this emphasis outside of each of their rooms is to talk about what are the roles of the statewide elected officials and how do you find them when they're not in their ceremonial offices, as well as focus on the executive branch for the governor and the attorney general. Second floor, a lot of emphasis on this space right here and the territorial foundings that we had here in Wyoming, the importance of women's suffrage, our territorial council across the way. And then during the interim, this is a space where in the interim, we can spend more time on the second floor in the lobbies, focusing on the branches. And then in session, that emphasis would move upstairs to the third floor so that we don't have tour groups in your lobbies. And then third level, the main focus up on the third level will be the branch, legislative branch education itself, as well as some history about the Four Sisters and there's some more building construction ideas encapsulated in there. And then as we go into the extension, the thought is that will be, it's obviously a more contemporary space. That would be the great space to tell some of the stories about Wyoming and the great things to do in all the regions of the state, as well as down when you get to the north end of the extension, both Esther Hobart Morris and Chief Washakie to tell some of those stories. And then we have that unfinished visitor center. And that is the space that the Exhibit and Wayfinding Committee really sees as the student area. Any visitor can come in, but that's really a good space to truly learn in an interactive and engaging way about what does the legislative branch do and what does the executive branch do. And it's adjacent to our Student Learning Center. There's some goals to make the Student Learning Center a little more exciting than it is right now. It's now basically it's a great classroom space, but to enliven it up a little bit, it's also an incredible space. Many of you during the interim have students visiting the Capitol and you are not here. So the thought of the committee is if we can set up some programming that if you're available, you can actually by video greet the students on their way to their tour would be a great way for you to engage with your students when they're here during the interim. And then as we go up through the Hirschler building, that's mainly a wayfinding focus. I did not mention on each of these floors the wayfinding, but there's comprehensive electronic and static wayfinding planned for each of these floors. The Hirschler building is mainly a wayfinding issue. And those of us who work in the Capitol have encountered many and exasperated citizen trying to find different folks in different government agencies, and you just don't know which door to go to. And so that's a huge part of what the Hirschler piece is, as well as getting tour groups from 26th Street down into the Student Learning Center and Visitor Center area. So it's much more comprehensive than just a visitor center exhibits.
So, Mr. Chairman, it's been remarkable to kind of reflect back on this building and what we were able to accomplish the last 10 years, but to go all the way back. And it's pretty amazing, the hope and the belief and the determination that our territorial forefathers and foremothers had in 1888. When you think about it, that's just a remarkable thing. And we're so fortunate to have this building back into the shape that it is, and hopefully reflecting for the next 125 years. That's just an amazing thing. They weren't a state then, and they gathered up things wherever they could find them to help build this building. And so we're excited to bring you the idea that, hey, you know what, we've got an opportunity to finish this in a way that we envisioned. And I don't think we would ever regret anything that we can do on this front. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excellent questions for our, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And in this, in this, you didn't go over it, but you have a budget. And I'm wondering if the Wayfinding Committee, did they suggest that we in fact do this now, that this is a good time to do this, and that that committee would, I guess, do they suggest we go ahead and budget for this and get this done?
Fine.
Mr. Chairman, representative, absolutely. And I think to the person on the subcommittee, we feel strongly that it's time. And I believe that that if we really lean into the blocking sled together, I think we can get there. One of the things that I ask that we do through our consultants and among ourselves was to present the complete picture to all of you. There are a couple of peripheral sorts of issues related to this wayfinding and interpretive effort by our subcommittee. And one of them is we still don't have all the furniture in this building. The second issue that is of concern, what am I trying to think of? The furniture and acoustics and landscaping. Yeah, acoustics. I couldn't come up with the word. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I particularly wanted that included in our consideration moving forward because that was an issue that came up in the last session. Several visitors and several of the legislators commented that we probably need to think about some acoustics. So in my mind, those are peripheral issues to what the subcommittee is tasked with. We need to finish up the furnishings to the building, and we should think about acoustics and sound because that's important.
Like
you being in
in the
communications, Mr. Chairman, you know, if you can't hear,
Oh, it drives me nuts.
you might as well not have the press.
Two end
announce.
rooms, for example, Mr. Chairman, that's a tough place to hold a meeting. So.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
so, thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, and this maybe is a question for Matt. Well, first a question, I guess, to you, Senator Landon. The estimated budget I'm seeing here isn't very detailed. So if you were going on the floor with this and they're going, okay, yeah, it's down to the dollar, but we don't really see what's behind this. So I assume that there's a sheet behind this. Maybe it was on the page before, but I don't think it was. And so my question is, do we have more detail? And that's my question to you. And then my question to Matt, is this suitable for, a budget amendment in the main budget, the CapCon bill, the legislative feed bill, all of the above? What can we get away? Obviously, I don't think we have time in this committee to draft a bill and then come out with a bill, but I suppose we could, but I think that's pressing.
Well, we do have we have one of the chairman of appropriations in the room, so be careful.
Mr. Chairman,
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. Oh, Senator Hicks. And then I want to, before I do that, could I acknowledge we have Madam Auditor Racinas in the room on the video? Could we say, is there anything you'd like to say before we go to Senator Hicks, Madam Auditor?
yeah, Mr. Chairman, I do have a couple of my colleagues here from Teton County on the appropriation, and the budget as it currently sits today, there's $2 million appropriated for wayfinding, and it does include some reference to acoustics in some of the buildings also.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back to Madam Auditor. Did you have anything you'd like to contribute?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I apologize for not being there in person. Can you hear me okay?
Please, yes.
Okay, great. Fremont County internet can be a little iffy, so let me know if I cut out. I think that my co-chair and Wendy covered it very, very well. I would add on a couple things. A few of the things that the subcommittee is really focusing on before we get down into the very nitty gritty details of what color different things are going to be is making sure we have the right structure in place as far as approvals. I mean, we have the committee with, 3 legislators and 3 executive branch members, but we're really just wanting to check the box so that at the very end of this, nobody can come back and say, gosh, that I had a better idea, or that's not really where we wanted that. Or so we're focusing on that before we really start making some very detailed decisions that can't be rolled back. One thing that is challenging, I think, and will continue to be challenging, and I imagine you all can recognize this, we're looking for a very cohesive style. However, we have 2 exceptionally different spaces to work with, that being the extension and the Capitol. While they blend seamlessly right now, picking out things and styles and wording that fit well in both of those buildings, I think is very doable, but it's one of the things that we're working through. The something Wendy said that I wanted to really emphasize, the potential content scope is absolutely endless. And I think that's something we need to be careful of. So we are working on what are the main stories we want to tell, like we can all agree that suffrage is one of those, or I hope we can anyway. But from there on, and I think Senator Landon would agree, we could add on 50 different timelines or stories we want to put in. And so distilling those down to the most important ones, I think will continue to be a challenge. So our scope, remains something that we can all get our arms around. Now, that being said, as far as the legislature goes as appropriators, the subcommittee has cast a fairly wide net as far as getting pricing for these items. And Senator Landon, please disagree with me if I say something incorrect, but our intent was really to have a very robust buffet. We wanted to price out everything so that in the middle of the session, the legislature isn't saying, well, did you think about this space? And we say, gosh, we didn't think about that room. So that's why we've been pretty broad geographically on the buildings of our subjects. The spectrum of mobile technology to analog technology is very wide. Wendy touched on this a little bit. The possibilities are endless. One of the things that really came up in our last 2-day meeting quite a bit was, there's this thought that every student in Wyoming is going to get down and visit the Capitol, once or twice or 3 times during their elementary career. That looks fabulous and sounds fabulous on paper, but that's not realistic. I can tell you, as a Riverton kid, I didn't get to come to the Capitol. Our long distances don't allow every 4th grade student to get to come down to Cheyenne for a day and see the Capitol. So we've had a lot of conversations about You know, mobile content on your phone while you're looking at an exhibit is one thing, but how can we bring this to classrooms across the state as well, to kids and district and schools that may not be able to physically get down to the Capitol? The other thing I would say, I really want to hammer home, while it is the least exciting maybe component of this project, the wayfinding is critical. If we do anything, it has to be the wayfinding. This is not a joke. This is not me trying to be funny. I got lost trying to find the wayfinding meeting last week, and I work in the Hirschler building. So it is pretty bad there. So let's see, I just have a few notes and I apologize. I think it's a very exciting project. It's really easy to get excited about. I think that now is the time. To Representative Summers' point, I think there's broad consensus about moving the composites. I would certainly not stand in the way of that effort. However, I will say they're on the way to the parking garage, and I get to walk by the House of Representative composites like 3 or 4 times a day, and I will really miss them if they go somewhere else. So, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chair, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you. Any questions for Madam Auditor? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, you can see why we're very fortunate to have the auditor with us and now co-chairing the project. Have really appreciated working alongside. Appreciate that, Madam Co-Chairman. Your comments were spot on. To come back to the question, Representative Summers, that you had, I think my goal in this process was to work up through those of you who serve on the Appropriations Committee and the leadership of the legislature. Obviously, whatever we are able to budget for this project, we can make it work. My message to you today is I hope that we are willing to step up and do it right. We talked about the trim around the door. That should be real pine wood. It shouldn't be particle board. And I would leave you with that just to say, you know, I think that somewhere around 2%, 2+% of the total cost of the project is normally what you factor in when you come to the end of a big construction project. You know, that's about what you should set aside for things like interpretive and wayfinding.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I appreciate the fact that that appropriations put 2 million in, but what is that going to buy us, right? So, and likewise, 8.153, whatever that is, what is that buying us? So kind of need a breakdown to understand what this is. And if there's varying, I'm with you. If we're going to do it, let's do it. You know, why do you piecemeal it? And then you piecemeal it and it doesn't make sense. So, but we need to understand, what does 2 million buy? What does 4 million buy? What does 8 million buy? And so we just need to see, I need to see that anyway. Thank you. And I certainly support this, and I think we ought to fund it. If we're ever going to fund it with the one-time dollars we have now, now's the time to fund it.
Mr. Chairman, or
Just to comment, I'm with you, Representative Summers. We have not drilled down that deeply at this point. Seeking more to, I think, to look at more of an umbrella type of appropriation is kind of what I had in the back of my mind, and then we go to work to make it fit. But this is a pretty good representation. It gives you a ballpark, you know. And by the way, what's suggested in here includes some of that acoustical item that we talked about a little bit earlier. But Wendy, any comments on that front?
Mr. Chairman, we do have supporting spreadsheets that correlate to each of those floor plans that we quickly went through with you that show for each exhibit type. Obviously, technology is more expensive than static. There was a lot of discussion on the subcommittee that if you cut scope, you need to be careful that you don't suddenly put aluminum in here where there's cherry wood. And so they've had discussions about right now, this $8 million figure shows you for the capital, the finishes that would be appropriate in the capital and includes layered approaches of both static and technology. So the spreadsheets that we give you will show you that, and we're happy to provide that for you. What it wouldn't necessarily show is if hard decisions needed to be made about, would you leave the visitor center shelled or would you try to do less everywhere? So I guess what we could say is if say it was 4 million, I think it would be incumbent upon the subcommittee to decide, would there just be a desire to do the capital first, or would there be a desire to do the visitor center first? Or not do technology. We did discuss that with Dimensional Innovations. They said the problem is if you were to try to come back next session and the timeline that's also provided in the package for you assumes design continuing the rest of this year, fabrication next year with a ribbon cutting in advance of the 2024 budget session. And if you tried to come in later and say next session, oh, we added 4 million, that's a little bit more difficult because they're already all the way through shop drawings and everything else. So you basically start over. You don't really want to at that point say, hey, we want to add this in, because that's, they use the example of it's cheaper to erase than it is to start deconstructing things. And I had a question, could we just, if you didn't get the funding, could you add technology later? And you can, but it's a little clunkier than if you incorporate it in seamlessly. So the question of what you buy for 4 million would be a little harder to address. It would be probably just as you look at those floor plans with the spreadsheets, imagine maybe you just wouldn't do an exhibit case here. Maybe you would just have a static panel.
Or, Mr. Chairman, appreciate Wendy's comments. She's spot on. You begin to back off of, what's being suggested is really the bottom line. And this idea of what can we do to really make those meeting rooms sparkle for the people of Wyoming. Maybe we can't do that. That's kind of a dream that the subcommittee has. And I think it's got amazing potential, but maybe, you just begin to scale back. Wendy makes a very good point, by the way, that really ideally, if you can set a budget and work it all the way through, it's pretty difficult to come back in later and say, well, we always meant on that wall and that panel, we were going to add a technology piece. Well, it's tough to retrofit sometimes after the fact. And the other thing is it might take 15 years before you get back to it too.
So. Chairman Nicholas, we've got you in the room. Overall, this is 2 reasons. You oversee the budget, and this is in your hometown. What about your thoughts on this? We'll make room here to Mike here for you if you'd like.
Thank you. I should have brought my bolo tie, but I didn't. So first of all, that the 8.5 million is the number that that our consultant gave us, that just includes the corridors, the wayfinding, and 4 or 5 million of that is basically constructing various types of exhibits. And that's what they do. That's one of their primary businesses that we'll have to pick on or decide. It will be down in the corridors and in the extensions and part of the introduction to students and that type of thing. But that 8.5 million that you see in your handout doesn't include grounds and certain other things. It doesn't include the TV studio. So the total number is actually closer to about 9.5 million to do all those things. We have some dollars left over that they're in the budget where that money is going to flow back into the account that's going to be controlled by this Wayfinding Committee. We've got 2 million that specifically is directed in the budget towards this effort. That's coming from the tourism dollars, the excess of the that we're receiving from the or the room tax that we now have. We've got $1 million set aside that's specifically earmarked for acoustics. With this 8.5 million, we haven't accepted that number as the right number. We think that we're going to probably have to whittle that down some, because frankly, it's just a lot of money to ask for certain things. When we're, when last session, we were pulling kids' food out of and education out of, the needy around the state. So we want to be responsible about it and so we've been hesitant to lock into that 8.5 number. But that other 1 to 1.5 million for the grounds and for other things that need to be done, those are hard numbers. So we'll have a kind of a package that we'll present, and I'll probably bring an amendment on the House side that will have some real numbers to it and where we're at and where we'll end up, and either run that as a House committee bill as we present it. One of the things that we talked about last week is we have the Wyoming Constitution that nobody gets to see. This would be the perfect room to have a display of the Wyoming Constitution. But that would be in a glass enclosed case that has specific lighting and that has temperature controlled and humidity control. So it'd be a $500,000 to $600,000 project just for that itself, and a mechanism that you can turn the pages or have the real one, and then have another one that's adjacent to it or near it. That's a mimeograph copy that looks just like it, that you can actually turn through the pages. That would just be a fantastic thing to add to this building. But certain things are just a lot more expensive than others, but we're looking at all those different components of it. We'll get there. We'll have the right numbers for the bodies when it happens, but the real number is about 9.5 million. I think the Wayfinding group will cut about 2 million out of that in terms of what we fabricate down in the corridors and for the extension, because that's something we can theoretically do at another date. Whether or not we do if we get funding to have a TV studio down there and for the interviews and for when we go down there and do that during the session, that's going to take obviously quite a bit more money to do. And so that may be a piecemeal component of it, but that'll be a product of, we'll present the cost on a spreadsheet handout, ask for everything and see what we can get when this thing circulates the House. But I'd be happy to answer any other questions that you have.
Chairman Nicholas, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Nicholas, you talked about the different options for this, and in terms of how this proceeds on the floors procedurally, and I would just like to put in that I strongly feel that this should be a separate bill, not as a budget amendment, not as a CapCon amendment. And that's really the ranking I'd put it on. I mean, I think the least preferable is a budget amendment. I just don't think this is appropriate in the budget. And I really think it should be a separate bill. Really.
Other questions? You would like to?
Nothing further. I appreciate you, Representative Gray's comments. Unfortunately, we tried that once and it didn't work, frankly. And this has been budgeted through the budgetary process for the last three or 4 years. But primarily, the original budget came out of the budget for the Capitol. And there was money back then, there was about 4.5 to 5 million set aside for that. But because of the overruns of some of the costs of completing the Capitol, we had to rob part of that account. Otherwise, we'd be at least halfway there. They didn't do the sophistication on the wayfinding that we're going into. And so we're going to do something we think that's more complete, that will last 150 years. And so we kind of past the concept of having a separate bill for it. This is because it's an add-on to what we've already done, but that's probably where we should have started from. I don't disagree with that. So
thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Right. Follow up?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, as some have commented, is $8 million kind of cryptic. What exactly? There's one slide where it kind of lays it out. What I'm not understanding is why we can't just have signage a couple things through a cell phone that an app or something that someone can take a guided tour, pick historical topics, and that's very important that we pick that and get that right. And then have an option in the visitors docents room where somebody that doesn't have a phone or doesn't want to load an app or something like that has the ability to walk around with something, that a mobile device that we provide. And to me, that should not cost $8 million. And so how are we getting to, I guess, $9.5 million? I guess the visitor center is included in that currently shelled room. Can you walk me through, because there's this one slide and it's just like 4 lines, and the big one is like fabrication and construction for $4.5 million. I guess that's what you mean, this company that sort of designs these. I guess we're going to have little pods of just a few little things around the building. I guess that's what that means, the construction of that. But how on earth is this getting to $9.5 million? And you can just work it down a little more, how that got to that
Would
point.
this be a question for the committee, or Mr. Chairman Nicholas, do you want to jump in there?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The answer is I'll be happy to walk through that with you. I've got some of it upstairs. Wendy has all of it in her office.
Why don't we do that individually?
So I'd be happy to do that with you, Representative Gray. I mean, we all have our own different visions and what we think is appropriate and how much we want to spend and what we can afford. And so that's why these issues come before this committee and will be on the floor of the House. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate Representative Nicholas being here and echo his statements. Really, that's the debate. That's the conversation we'll have over the next month and beyond, is what do we feel like is appropriate for this building? I referenced a few minutes ago that we were a territory when this thing was built. That's the kind of hope and determination and belief that the people of this part of the country had, to put this thing here in the first place. So as you can tell, I feel pretty strongly that we need to do this right. I think we ought to try to shoot hard to do as much as we can to make this the experience that we think it can be. But no, you're right. I mean, we could certainly, Representative Gray, you could put some signage above the bathrooms and put a couple of arrows and we could do it that way for sure. I certainly hope we don't. I hope we can have a good conversation going forward, and we'll try to get as much detail as we can, and we'll get it to all of you. We didn't want to dig too deeply today because over the last 8 months, that's what we've been doing. So
Appreciate your work.
a lot of
Thank you for that work.
information.
We have a Senator. Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, going back to the beginning of the project and the Capital Restoration Oversight Committee and how we structured the legislation, there was a lot of discussion about how we were going to do this and what the objectives were. And a big part of the original objective was to not only do an incredible job of transforming the building back to its historical foundation, but then providing it as an open house for the people. And that included a discussion and budgeting, as Chairman Nicholas mentioned, for wayfinding and for the educational component, providing opportunity, a welcoming opportunity for students to come in. And so it never was simply about let's repaint the walls. It was about creating an open, welcoming experience for the people of the state of Wyoming. And we're just not done with that yet. And honestly, you look at any other state renovation in the country and you look at the diligence of the budget and how well we performed relative to our budget projections. I think the fact that we ended up a few $1 million short on wayfinding at the end of several $100 million worth of project, when we ended up with additional asbestos costs, we ended up with a required major maintenance renovation associated with the dome and many other expenses that were unanticipated, but were still part of the contingency budget for the most part. I think we're at a point now where we need to finish this up right, as Chairman Landon suggested. So the idea that we're balking at $9 million to finish a several $100 million, many-year, once-in-a-generation project. I think we need to once again do this right. That's been the theme and the motivation for every step along the way of this. And honestly, I'm quite proud of the fact that we managed to do this right. You look around this room, we didn't have to do this. We could still have a ceiling above us right now and have 2 floors. This was not necessary, but it was the right thing to do. And here's another opportunity. So Chairman Landon, I appreciate the fact that you're trying to do this right. And Chairman Nicholas, the same thing, just making sure that we've got the resources available. Appreciate it.
Appreciate your work, gentlemen. Anybody on the screen? I'll come back. We have Senator Grew, and then we're going to come back to you, Representative Conley. Sorry. Go ahead, Senator.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Couldn't agree with more with the last comments for sure. I think that this, as someone who through JAC and various other committee assignments probably spends as much time in that building as, except for Chairman Nicholas, as anybody. I can tell you it's amazing to watch and see tourists come through and show them around when you get a chance. It really is. So much more can be done and so much more should be done. My question is kind of splitting this up into pieces a little bit. And correct me, I don't know if Matt's there or maybe Wendy can help me with this one, but the furniture was more of a fee bill thing originally. I thought that was, I know when we had the problem with the furniture and the company went out of business and all that, and we kind of got behind. But how much more do we have to go on the furniture side of that would be one question. And are we planning on addressing that in the feed bill? And secondly, I don't really, I know we put $2 million or appropriated $2 million from tourism over to this project. And I kind of thought about that as more of just let's start there and then see where we go. And I understand, I heard you, Wendy, when you talked about, not wanting to piecemeal this. I agree. I'd just as soon settle on a number, but maybe if we could help me with that furniture piece. And then the acoustics, I couldn't remember what we put in. Did we put in a separate line item for acoustics just for JAC room, or was that for all the building? I'm looking for my fellow JAC folks to help me with that one.
Let's do this. Furniture is next up on the agenda, but we will address the acoustics now. So.
Okay, thank you.
We lost you, so.
Mr. Chairman, yes, this will be a great tee up for the furniture discussion next, but for acoustics, that would include both a study for all of the major meeting rooms that you have experienced some acoustical issues, and then funding for, there's a variety of solutions. Some of them are acoustical materials. This ceiling has acoustical plaster, but most of your committee rooms do not. Drapery, there are a range of solutions. We do not know the dollar amount yet until a study is done. So that number is a placeholder, but is intended to be comprehensive for all areas that you've been experiencing problems in the last 2 years.
Thank you, Senator Grew. We're going to get to your question on that. Let's go. We got some, but we got them back. Yeah, I know they're there, but we have Representative Conley. We'll go in that order. Then we have little hands with Senator Hicks and Representative Schwartz. Let's go in that order. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a comment, I remember in the past year, the speaker and I met with how old was she? Maybe 95-year-old woman who came and the speaker came down from Gillette and I just came over the hill to meet with her. We were the 50th Capitol with her family to visit. And it was a remarkable experience, and the pride that we had in showing her this building, as well as how impressed she was with what we had chosen to do. It was really, really remarkable. Probably one of those experiences I won't forget. That being said, I'm going back to kind of the question about process. And if I remember correctly, when I first became minority leader, I was on a capital restoration committee that met pretty regularly. And ultimately, it was this body, Management Council, that said, we don't need that committee anymore. We're going to set up a subcommittee, and we are going to let them do the last work that needs to be done. And we gave them the marching orders of, and do it right. right? And do it right. This, look around with what has been done right now, and we want it finished, but we're not going to have the expense of an entire committee doing it. And instead, we have Senator Landon, we have Representative Nicholas and Banks, and I think at least one other, as well as LSO staff and the auditor doing the work that honestly, we as the legislature was doing beforehand. And we asked them to simply bring back to us their recommendations and the mechanism in order to get it done. And that's what I'm hearing going on. And I want to thank you for doing that. But if we need to kind of expend those last monies, we need to do it. And our idea as management council is that we do it now. We don't kick that can down the road for another 15 years, but we do it now and we do it right. And so I appreciate you coming to us with the report. I appreciate giving us the mechanism in order to do it. And it is honestly finishing the work that we told you to do 2 years ago. Mr. Chairman, that's my comment, and that I think it is our obligation to hear and then support what the committee has to say or make modifications to it, but we don't stop it. Thank you.
Representative Conley, let's go up to Senator Hicks and then to Representative Schwartz in that order.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a request is it would be nice as we move forward and trying to look at this thing from a holistic view is I think we need to, if we're going to sell this, we got to be able to understand how much money's been spent, what was originally budgeted, what do we think it's going to cost, and again, back to a more detailed budget of what those items are. So my request would be for, LSO to go back and I think it comes back to some of Senator Landon's earliest comments about what was originally budgeted, what was captured, what have we spent money on for wayfinding, what have we not spent money on wayfinding. What was the original and conceptual for the wayfinding, and we now expanded that. I just know there's going to be a lot of questions on the floor, and right now I'm certainly not at a position that I can answer very many of those questions, but I know they're going to be out there as this continues, especially if we start, over a series of budget issues, or whether there's a budget amendment to raise it to 8.5 or 9.5. We're just going to need a lot more detailed information of how we got here, where we're at. Apparently, it was under budgeted, or maybe it was due to inflationary cost, or the project's been expanded based on current knowledge. I think we're going to need all of that information to explain it, particularly if we're going to go after a much bigger piece of money that's already in the budget. So I would ask for LSO to help put that together.
Thank you, Senator. You follow up before we go to Representative Schwartz? Okay, Representative Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm generally very supportive of how the subcommittee has presented this to us, and I believe we do need to appropriate the monies to accomplish what they're suggesting. But the one thing that I'm not sure I agree with, I keep hearing a reference to the notion of finishing. And I'm wondering if the subcommittee has discussed this in terms of it ultimately won't really ever be finished, that as things change, we will need to be constantly reviewing how the capital looks and functions. And I think just what we uncovered in the remodel is an indication that if we don't stay on it, a lot of things may happen that in the long run may not be beneficial. So I'm just curious if the committee has had that conversation.
Representative, let's divert. Matt wants to jump in here too. Is that okay with you, Mr. Chair? Go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that Representative Schwartz brings up an idea that I'll explore with Management Council probably after the session about what is the future vision for this building and what are the continuing operating costs associated with that vision. Right now, the project, we kind of had a mission accomplished moment in June of 2019. There was a lot of money and a lot of political capital and a lot of effort expended on this project. And I think people were tired worn out. And then, of course, COVID happened. And there's been some dedicated individuals who have moved certain pieces of that vision forward. This interpretive plan and wayfinding subcommittee is an excellent example of that, but it's not really a holistic operational management vision for this asset, the state asset. That was attempted in the legislature in the 2019 session and not completely finalized there between what would the management structure of this building look like moving forward. I think we probably need to consider maybe a capital architect position and what the total governance structure will look like between the executive and legislative branch on this moving forward.
Thank you. Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, really appreciate the director arriving at a point where we needed to today. At some point during the conversation that needed to come up, that going forward. And by the way, I wanted to thank Representative Schwartz. He hit a nail on the head that really I stand corrected. We're not really finishing anything. We're getting caught up to where we should be. And so those were good comments, some great comments all the way across the board. I wanted to back up and just tip my hat real quickly, Mr. Chairman, to the former co-chairman, our former superintendent of public instruction. She had quite a dream that this would become an even grander educational experience for those students that come. And so that's, we have talked along the way where that could take place and how it could take place. Another point I wanted to make before we close out today is just that we've tried to pay a lot of attention to the kind of exhibits and the kind of things that we would put in the Capitol, because we are sensitive to the fact that we don't have staff and we don't have a lot of infrastructure ability to keep things up. So would we like a lot of technology? Sure, but technology takes people to run it and to take care of it. So we're going to be careful on that front. Senator Hicks, we're going to work on it. We're going to try to get the information out there that you and others need to have. The three of us, the rest of the subcommittee, I know the co-chairman stands ready to help, and we'll do everything we can to get some detail.
Mr. Chairman and your committee, Wendy, Rihanna, really appreciate all the work done on this. It's an incredible building. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President, Mr. Chairman. So the Wayfinding Committee was basically put together because there was a bill that did not survive, that was forming up a group to do basically what the director just talked about. And that was to create an overall governing body of legislators and the executive department to manage this building. And because that has to take place. And so basically the Wayfinding Committee now is the temporary committee that's performing that function. But I think the overall vision is that there's a permanent body, which will be legislators and members of the executive branch that will put together and orchestrate the future of this building. And since this building, even because I was on the Capitol, on the Oversight Committee, and I've walked through this with two governors so far, there's a different vision on what the executive department division usually wants as compared to the legislature. And so that's why it's 3 and 3 on the Wayfinding Committee, is so that we can work together to get to where we want to go. And because it needs to be a joint effort, we have to agree to it. That's why we still don't have all the furniture for this building, quite honestly. Right, there's an order right now for $200,000 that needs to go out the door, and it needs to happen in the next 15 or 20 days, or the price is going to go up another 15%. And yet it's kind of in a quagmire on how we get things done and who orders what, who controls what, and who gets to order. And so that's the things that's one of the other objectives and goals that the Wayfinding Committee is going to do. When you walk down the halls of this Capitol, it is still incomplete. I was walking with my co-chairman, Senator Perkins, last week, and he's looking around and says, it still feels about a little bit half empty in this building. So there's still things that we have to do, and that's our job is to, come up with the funds to find a way to accomplish that. What else is in this budget? The docents are running the show right now, and they're all volunteers, along with a little bit of help. But also in the budget, there's a full-time position that's going to be basically managing the tourists coming in and coming out. We're not open on weekends. Why in the world would this building not be open on weekends when most people are here from Wyoming who wants to visit it? That needs to be addressed. When this project was started, we knew it would take 3 or 4 or 5 new janitors to take care of just this building. And yet we have 2 janitors that do all the work in this building right now. So there's funding in the budget that pays for more positions through A&I to help take care of this building and also help manage the other building. So Esther Hobart Morris down there is a work of art. It's not a work of art, but it needs fixed, and it's expensive to do it. That's on this budget. Chief Washakie needs fixed and repaired. That's on it. All these items add up to the bucking horse also needs repaired. All those things add up to that 9.5 million. But what we also need to do is probably create an endowment that starts funding this on a regular basis. So we don't have to come back to the legislature every 2 years and ask for a few more dollars to do a few more things. And that's the long-term vision, I think, of what the director was talking about and that Wayfinding is talking about as well. And this is also, I think, a good opportunity because we have one-time dollars to help in that direction as well. So lots of things to talk about, lots of things to do, and it'll keep us busy for a long time. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate all the work gone into it. This is incredible building, incredible history, lots of stories here. Because we couldn't bring anybody in last year, arranged to bring my 4 children, my 4 adult children, places like Texas and California to come in this weekend and be a part of the first day. And Sunday, I'm going to walk them through this building and share those stories. In my inept way, I'll try to be a tour guide and show them how important this building is to our state. And excited about it. And I compliment all of you for your work you've done. Thank you so much. Anything else for the good of the cause?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I've visited 3 different state capitals this year that I had never been to before. And, 2 of the capitals, I had to wander around the ground just to figure out which door that I'm supposed to enter. So wayfinding, I think, is extremely important to make sure not just that people visiting from other places know how to get in and out of the building, but when people who are trying to civically engage in our meetings, get to their representative, or just even with kids who are visiting to understand that they understand how the state works. So when they become adults, they will be civically engaged and informed on how the process works. So I do think it's really important. And I like the idea of having an endowment for it. So this is something that will be a process over time. And I am thankful for all the work that the subcommittee has done already. And one other comment on the composites, as the good auditor had mentioned, she walks on the House side. I walk down the hallway with the Senate portraits, and I get to see Senator Scott go back and forward in time, and I do really enjoy that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Anything else? All right, we'll move on then, and that takes us straight
Mr.
into
Chairman.
furniture. Go ahead.
Chairman, I think it is important for us to have a tourist experience for those that are coming into the building. But I guess where I diverge on this is just, the consultant comes back with 9.5 million. And I do think that I don't think that's good enough. I mean, I think that we need to see what this is going towards, and it seems pretty high. I mean, I can tell you, I'm not the only person that has said that. I mean, I looked at the TRW presentation, talked to some people on that. I watched that the other day on the YouTube, and it's just cryptic to me on what this is doing. Now, I think on this other question that has come up on the floor a few times, which is that is the building finished or not? I mean, and at some point, I think some people need to, there's 2 things here. Is it ongoing enhancements or maintenance? And I think this notion that the building is not finished, at some point in our minds, we need to decide when it is finished. Okay, and maybe, and I think that argument that is used a lot of times on the floor is, to me, it's problematic. And then we can talk about what the ongoing structure is, what the enhancements are, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And there will be nothing cryptic. It'll be all out in the open. People will know what we're doing.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
just a quick comment, and I know you need to wrap this up, and appreciate the representative. And I think one thing that we all need to remember is that regardless of what building you build, and I've been on school facilities for 10 or 12 years. I've been on the State Building Commission, so I've been around this a long time. And there's a difference between the construction phase of any building, and then you have operational startup. Well, the operational startup has now begun with this building. And then the representative indicated, rightfully so, that we're going to have ongoing maintenance and ongoing things that need to be done with this state capitol. And so we're going to need to address that. But right now, we're in the operational startup phase. So is it expensive? Absolutely. If you've done any work on your residents at home or at your business, you know what's going on with cost right now. If we'd have been able to do this 2 or 3 years ago, it would have been a little cheaper. But yeah, the costs are going up. So no question, we're always going to have a debate over that. So thank
A few
you.
years ago, and we'll be careful in the coming.
Mr. Chairman, I really do want to thank the subcommittee for all their work on this, and the co-chairman for dialing in today. And appreciate all the great comments and look forward to visiting as we go along.
Thank you. Appreciate your work. Okay, on to furniture. That would be Director Obrecht and Wendy. Thanks for coming in, Chairman Nicholas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think the best place to start this discussion was with Senator Garu's questions about what's left for furniture. And just as a quick update, the Director Obrecht's comment about a mission accomplished comment a few years ago maybe was a little bit difficult because construction, and Representative Gray, construction is done. I think that is a really good point. That part is finished. What happened after the 2019 opening was the shelled space, the additional space was completed. The AV portion of the project began, and then COVID hit us. And Suzanne Norton from the Construction Management Division and I have been working since that time on what's called the FF&E portion of the project. There were some remaining dollars, but frankly, some of those dollars were used for contingency for construction. And the oversight group at the time said, hey, we're mobilized. We have trades on site. There were times where choices were made, recognizing that it could impact the FF&E dollars down the line, but it made sense, for example, to get more square footage or to take care of dome and drum problems and a whole host of things that come up on these projects. So Suzanne and I, the last couple of years, have been kind of balancing, trying to figure out, okay, how much can you buy and what's needed for the monies remaining. And that work has been overseen by our interior design consultant, who was funded through the feed bill with a provision that contract would be approved by both Management Council and State Building Commission, because the furnishings are throughout the Capitol Square. So there's a number of packages that have gone out. All of the office furniture and conference room furnishings are done. There is in process right now a second set of shades in all the south facing rooms. This room will be receiving shutters. That package will be coming in delivery, unfortunately, right after session, but it will help because you are just a halo to folks sitting in the audience right now. That package is done. There's some custom furnishings that are done. And really, those are all taken care of. What is left is mainly miscellaneous ancillary package that includes public seating. And so I wanted to quickly bring you through that. That is about $210,000 worth of work. We're still working through, there's a few remaining dollars in the project Senator Guru that is through the capital rehabilitation and restoration account that has been appropriated to CMD and is encumbered. And with these packages being bid, this one has been bid and awarded pending funding. There's some funding remaining. We're still trying to figure out what's left. Then we're trying to figure out with price increases, whether or not we'd wait and see what happens this session, or whether there's some of this package that we would try to do now with funding that we have received through the feed bill, but would still not cover all of this, as well as either if CMD approaches SBC contingency or flex contingency, just so we could get it purchased right away, because there was a 90-day hold on the award of that contract. That's about 200,000. I won't spend a lot of time on this going through, but I did want you to see again, just quickly, what it would provide for is seating for the public is one of the biggest complaints that we've gotten. There's two types of visitors. There's visitors traveling through. They are often looking for places to sit, as well as folks who are waiting either to visit with you or waiting for a committee meeting to start. Rosalie Ruard, our interior designer, has worked on a number of pieces throughout the third floor galleries, third floor rotunda outside of JAC. You can see the fabrics and the pieces. This is also a place to sit for visitors and enjoy the third floor rotunda. We'll quickly move through. Each of these shows you floor by floor. Lobbies, we have struggled mightily because the goal in the lobbies was to really make sure we can exit you safely out of the building. And the old lobbies did not allow us to do that. Rosalie's done a masterful job of finding a place to add 4 more seats in each lobby while still allowing for that egress. So you can see that there. First floor, some seating outside those west room 110 and 113. Some areas outside each of the elected officials' offices for when they're here using their ceremonial offices, as well as some spaces in the rotunda alcoves. And then some areas for the governor's office. Finally, garden level offers a lot of opportunities for folks to sit in kind of little niche areas. This is also in consideration of the current exhibit and wayfinding plan where those locations would be. It also would continue down into the extension and provide some soft seating there. All soft seating also helps you with acoustics. We do have a variety of historic wood chairs around. Believe it or not, folks have not always been very happy with wood chairs, and they don't help you from an acoustical perspective. So that package that I quickly ran through is about 210,000. One of the things that Matt and I had talked about is we're still trying to finalize that budget, but we did want to come to you and approach the idea that if we can go ahead and get that package done, it's about 27-week lead time on a lot of these custom soft seating pieces. So we would like to go ahead and get that underway as soon as possible, and while those prices still hold. So we did want to see about the possibility of using some legislative contingency for the third and second floor spaces if the project can't bear the remainder of that cost. And that would be about $80,000 for third and second floors. 80.
Ready for a question on that here?
Certainly,
Yes,
Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any follow up then for Wendy?
Mr. Chairman, just a question. So do we need a motion to do some of that, Matt? What are we trying to accomplish here, or what do we
Matt,
need to think about?
Send us in the
here?
right direction, would you?
Yeah, you bet. No, so, Mr. Chairman, the motion would be to authorize up to $80,000 in management council contingency funds to finish the ancillary furniture package on the second and third floor and other legislative space if there is not remaining funds in the Capitol Square project budget to do so.
So moved. Okay, we got a first and a second here. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Okay. Opposition from one, let's proceed. Then you've got what you need there then?
So, Mr. Chairman, that's the end of your agenda today. You could ask for public comment and then I believe there will be a motion to go into executive
Right.
session. We'll take a break and then send out actually, I think Anthony's already done it. We've got a private link for
Before we
that.
take a break, any public comment from anywhere? Comment? Public comment. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks has his hand up. I don't know if that was
Senator
left
Hicks,
over.
Where did you go? Senator Hicks?
I'm just a leftover.
Well, we don't even see you, sir. You want to speak to us, Senator Hicks? Go ahead. Okay.
I just didn't take my hand down, Mr. President.
All right. Thank you. So with that, we'll take a break.